Have you ever stood among ancient ruins? Surrounded by colossal stones and weathered statues, it's hard not to feel a sense of awe. These were the centers of the world once, built by civilizations that believed their glory would last forever. But history tells a different story. It's a story whispered in the wind that blows through these empty halls, a story of power, pride, and the fatal illusion of permanence. Think of the mighty Roman Empire. For centuries, it was the definition of power, a sprawling civilization that shaped the Western world. Its legions were unstoppable, its engineering was legendary, and its culture was the gold standard. To a Roman citizen living in the Golden Age, the idea that Rome could ever fall would have been laughable. They were eternal. Yet, looking back, the warning signs were everywhere, like cracks appearing in a grand statue. Long before the final collapse, thinkers and historians like Tacitus and Sallust were sounding the alarm. They wrote about the decline in moral virtue, the rampant corruption among the elite, and the growing gap between the ultra-rich and the impoverished masses. They saw that the discipline that had built the empire was eroding, replaced by luxury and complacency. But who listens to a pessimist when the party is still going strong? The bread and circuses continued, distracting the populace while the foundations of their society slowly rotted away. The empire also faced constant external pressures. Barbarian tribes were no longer just a distant threat. They were at the borders, sometimes raiding, sometimes serving as mercenaries within the Roman army itself. The empire became overstretched, its military too thin to defend its vast frontiers. Military leaders became more loyal to their own troops than to the emperor in Rome, leading to constant civil wars and instability. Each warning, each crisis was treated as a temporary problem, not a symptom of a deep, systemic disease. They patched the leaks, but never bothered to check the integrity of the ship's hull. They believed they were unsinkable. Let's travel across the globe to the Ming Dynasty in China. In the early 15th century, Admiral Zheng he commanded a fleet of treasure ships, the largest the world had ever seen. These dragon ships dwarfed Columbus's vessels and projected Chinese power across the Indian Ocean. The Ming Dynasty was a powerhouse of innovation, culture, and trade. It felt like their dominance was a fact of nature. But then, a shift in thinking occurred. A new faction of Confucian scholar officials rose to power. They saw these expensive overseas expeditions as a wasteful vanity project. They argued that China was the self-sufficient center of the universe and had nothing to learn or gain from the barbarians abroad. They warned against the corrupting influence of foreign trade and contact. And so, in a stunning act of self-imposed isolation, the emperor ordered the fleet to be dismantled and the records of its voyages destroyed. China turned inward, building and reinforcing the Great Wall, convinced it could shut the world out. This decision, born from a mix of arrogance and fear, was a catastrophic miscalculation. While China slept, Europe was waking up. The age of discovery was dawning. Portuguese, Spanish, and Dutch ships, tiny by comparison to Zheng He's fleet, began charting the globe, establishing trade routes and building colonial empires. By the time the West came knocking on China's door centuries later with gunboats and cannons, the Middle Kingdom was woefully unprepared. They had ignored the biggest warning of all: the world doesn't stand still. By believing in their own permanent superiority and closing themselves off, they sealed their own decline. Now let's look at the British Empire, the empire on which the sun never set. At its peak in the early 20th century, it controlled a quarter of the world's land and people. The British believed they were on a civilizing mission, bringing order, technology, and enlightenment to the world. The permanence of their empire seemed assured, not just by military might, but by a sense of moral and cultural destiny. Yet, even at the height of its power, the seeds of its undoing were being sown. The two world wars, while ending in victory, bled the empire dry. Britain was financially exhausted and its prestige was damaged. Across its colonies from India to Africa, nationalist movements were gaining momentum. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi in India challenged not just British rule, but the moral basis for it. He warned them that an empire built on subjugation could not last. Many in Britain dismissed these movements as minor rebellions, the work of a few ungrateful agitators. They couldn't imagine a world where the Union Jack didn't fly over Delhi or Nairobi. They held on to the illusion of control, even as it was slipping through their fingers. The Suez Crisis in 1956 was the final, humiliating wake-up call. When Britain, France, and Israel invaded Egypt to retake the Suez Canal, they were forced into a humiliating withdrawal by pressure from the United States and the Soviet Union. It was a stark declaration that the world order had changed. Britain was no longer a top-tier superpower. The empire on which the sun never set was finally facing its twilight, a twilight that many of its own people had refused to see coming. So what's the common thread here? Rome, the Ming Dynasty, the British Empire, all were titans of their time. And all suffered from a fatal case of what we might call permanence bias. It's the belief that your current success is a guarantee of future dominance. It has the arrogance that leads you to dismiss warnings as whispers of the weak or the jealous. These empires didn't collapse overnight. It was a slow, grinding process. It was a series of ignored warnings, missed opportunities, and bad decisions, all fueled by the comforting lie that we are the exception. They saw the cracks forming but chose to paint over them instead of repairing the foundation. They heard the thunder in the distance but convinced themselves it was just a passing storm. This pattern isn't just ancient history. It's a human story that repeats itself in corporations, in institutions, and even in our own lives. Think of a company that dominates its market. Like Nokia in the early 2000s, they were the kings of the mobile phone world. The warnings were there, the rise of smartphones, the importance of software and ecosystems, but they were comfortable. They were the giants. They believed their brand and manufacturing power were permanent advantages. And then the iPhone arrived, and their empire crumbled in just a few short years. The lesson from these fallen giants is both humbling and empowering. It teaches us that nothing is permanent. Power is temporary, success is fleeting, and the future is always unwritten. The civilizations and organizations that endure are not the strongest or the most powerful, but the most adaptable. They are the ones who listen to the dissenters, who pay attention to the warnings on the horizon, and who are humble enough to know that they might be wrong. They understand that the only permanent thing is change itself. So the next time you feel a sense of absolute certainty, the next time you're tempted to dismiss a warning or a new idea that challenges your worldview, remember the ghosts of Rome, the forgotten fleets of the Ming, and the setting sun of the British Empire. Their ruins stand as a timeless monument to a powerful truth. The moment you believe you are eternal is the moment you begin to fade away. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey through history interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the patterns that shape our world. Let me know in the comments which fallen empire fascinates you the most. See you in the next video.